There is a narrow waterway, barely a mile wide at its narrowest point, that has determined the fate of empires for 500 years. The Bosphorus Strait. It winds through the heart of Istanbul like a silver thread stitching together two continents. On any given day, you can stand on its shores and watch massive cargo ships glide past minarets that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The water appears almost black in the early morning light, and fishing boats bob alongside vessels carrying grain from Ukraine, oil from Kazakhstan, and the silent weight of history itself. This is the gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. This is the choke point that has obsessed Russian czars, Soviet premiers, and Kremlin autocrats for 250 years. Think about that for a moment. A single choke point governed by a single nation that can determine whether a superpower can project its military strength into the world's most strategically vital waters. And yet, in February 2022, something extraordinary happened. Turkey closed that gate. 3 days after Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu invoked Article 19 of the 1936 Montreux Convention and announced that Russian warships would no longer be permitted to transit the Turkish Straits. At least 4 Russian vessels were waiting in the Mediterranean to cross into the Black Sea when the announcement came. 2 destroyers, a frigate, an intelligence ship. They had to turn around. They had no choice. The dreams of czars and commissars, centuries of Russian strategic ambition, blocked by an 88-year-old treaty and a NATO ally playing a delicate geopolitical game. This is a haunting story about geography, power, and the crumbling of an empire that never fully accepted its own limitations. It is also a story about resilience, about how a nation with essentially no navy managed to devastate the fleet of a nuclear superpower, about how the oldest rules of geopolitics continue to shape the newest conflicts. The quest for warm water ports has shaped Russian foreign policy for as long as Russia has existed as a coherent state. The history of Russia, one geographer wrote, may be written in terms of its search for ocean ports. The Russian bear will not be content until it finds warm water. Peter the Great understood this when he founded St. Petersburg in 1703, carving a window to Europe from frozen marshland at enormous human cost. He fought the Ottomans for access to the Sea of Azov. He built Russia's first real navy. He failed to secure permanent southern access to the seas, but he established the pattern that would define Russian strategic thinking for centuries to come. Catherine the Great succeeded where Peter could not. In 2 brutal wars against the Ottoman Empire during the late 18th century, Catherine seized Crimea and established Russia's presence on the Black Sea. The Treaty of Küçükçayırca in 1774 granted Russia the right to navigate Ottoman waters for the first time. In 1783, Catherine ordered the construction of a naval fortress at a natural harbor on Crimea's southwestern coast. She named it Sevastopol, the City of Glory. The name itself was an expression of imperial ambition, a declaration that Russia had finally achieved what it had sought for so long. And yet, from the very beginning, there was a problem. Russia could reach the Black Sea. Russia could build fleets and fortresses and dream of Mediterranean glory. But getting from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, to the Atlantic, to the world's shipping lanes and naval theaters required passing through waters controlled by someone else. The Bosphorus, the Sea of Marmara, the Dardanelles, all of it belonged to the Ottoman Empire. All of it, today, belongs to Turkey. Think about that. The largest country on Earth, spanning 11 time zones, possessing the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and its entire naval strategy in the south, hinges on whether a single nation will let its ships pass through 40 miles of narrow water. This is the haunting reality that has defined Russian geopolitics for 2.5 centuries. This is the geographic curse that no amount of military power has been able to overcome. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 demonstrated just how vulnerable Russia remained. When Tsar Nicholas I attempted to expand Russian influence over Ottoman territories, claiming the right to protect Orthodox Christians throughout the empire, Britain and France intervened. They saw Russian expansion as a threat to the balance of power in Europe and to their own commercial interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. An allied force of 60,000 men, British, French, Ottoman, and eventually Sardinian, landed on the Crimean Peninsula and laid siege to Sevastopol, the very city that Catherine had built to project Russian power. The siege lasted 11 months. It became one of the most brutal military operations of the 19th century. Over 100,000 Russians died defending Sevastopol. The city was reduced to rubble. When it finally fell in September 1855, Russia was forced to sue for peace. The Treaty of Paris stripped Russia of its right to base warships in the Black Sea entirely. The naval power that Catherine had built was dismantled by foreign armies fighting on Russian soil. Think about that for a moment. Less than a century after Catherine's triumph, Russia's Black Sea position had been destroyed by the very geographic vulnerability she had tried to overcome. The straits remained in Ottoman hands. Russia remained trapped. It took 15 years before Russia could rebuild its southern fleet, exploiting Ottoman weakness during the Franco-Prussian War to renounce the treaty's restrictions. And yet, the fundamental problem remained unchanged. The straits still stood between Russia and the wider world. The pattern continued through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Russia fought war after war against the Ottoman Empire, seeking to control the straits, seeking to guarantee access to the Mediterranean. Every attempt failed. The straits remained in Turkish hands even as the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And when the Russian Empire itself collapsed in 1917, replaced by the Soviet Union, the geographic curse survived intact. The Montreux Convention of 1936 attempted to codify this reality. Signed in Switzerland as Europe braced for another world war, the treaty restored Turkish sovereignty over the straits while establishing rules for naval passage. Merchant vessels could pass freely in peacetime. Warships faced restrictions based on tonnage, numbers, and national status. Black Sea nations received somewhat more generous terms than outside powers. Most critically, Turkey gained the authority to close the straits to belligerent nations during wartime or whenever Ankara perceived an imminent threat of war. For decades, this arrangement served all parties reasonably well. The Soviet Union maintained its Black Sea fleet, building it into a formidable force with cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and amphibious ships. Turkey preserved its control over the straits, gaining security guarantees. NATO monitored Russian naval movements while lacking authority to challenge them directly. It was an uneasy equilibrium, fragile but functional, but it held. And then came the 24th of February 2022. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine changed everything. Within days, Turkey faced an extraordinary decision. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky personally appealed to Ankara to close the straits. The request placed Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in an almost impossible position. Turkey had cultivated careful relationships with both Russia and Ukraine for years. Turkish defense companies had sold Bayraktar TB-2 drones to Kyiv, the same drones that would soon become legendary for devastating Russian armored columns. But Turkey also depended on Russian natural gas, Russian tourism, Russian wheat, and Russian cooperation in Syria. Erdogan's calculation involved multiple competing interests. Turkey wanted to maintain its position as a mediator, a power that could talk to both sides and potentially broker peace. Turkey wanted to demonstrate its NATO credentials without provoking a direct confrontation with Moscow. Turkey wanted to uphold the legal framework of the Montreux Convention, which served Turkish interests regardless of which great powers were involved. Erdogan chose to act. On February 28, Cavusoglu announced that Turkey was invoking Article 19 of the Montreux Convention. The invasion constituted a war. Turkey was formally calling it a war, not a special military operation, not a conflict, but a war. And under the treaty, belligerent nations could not transit the straits unless their vessels were returning to home ports. Think about what this meant in practical terms. Russia's Black Sea Fleet was suddenly trapped. Whatever ships were already inside the Black Sea would have to stay there. Whatever ships were in the Mediterranean could not reinforce them. At least 4 Russian vessels that had been preparing to transit were forced to withdraw. The Russian Navy had effectively been cut in two. And yet, even within the Black Sea, Russian naval power would face an extraordinary challenge, one that nobody anticipated, one that would transform our understanding of modern naval warfare. Ukraine entered the war with essentially no navy. Russia had seized most of its vessels during the 2014 annexation of Crimea. 75% of the Ukrainian naval fleet had been captured in a matter of days. What remained was negligible by any conventional measure. The flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moskva, displaced 12,000 tons and carried 16 massive anti-ship missiles. Ukraine's largest remaining warship displaced perhaps 200 tons. The mismatch appeared total. Russia controlled the seas. The Moskva led the Russian naval assault in the early days of the war. It participated in the bombardment of Snake Island, where Ukrainian border guards famously told a Russian warship to go perform an anatomically impossible act. It provided air defense coverage for the Russian fleet operating against Ukraine's southern coast. It represented everything that made the Russian Navy formidable. And yet, on the 14th of April 2022, the Moskva was struck by 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles, Ukrainian-made weapons derived from Soviet-era designs but updated with modern guidance systems. The ship caught fire. Ammunition cooked off in catastrophic secondary explosions. The ship listed severely, and while being towed towards Sevastopol, it sank beneath the waters of the Black Sea. It was the largest warship lost in combat since the Falklands War of 1982. It was the largest Russian warship lost since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. The flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, named after the Russian capital, sent to the bottom by a nation that supposedly had no navy. The symbolism proved haunting, but the reality was even more devastating. Over the following months and years, Ukraine developed an entirely new form of naval warfare based on unmanned surface vessels. The Sea Baby drone, produced by Ukraine's security service, measured approximately 18 feet long and could carry up to 850 kilograms of explosives. Some variants carried even more, up to 2,000 kilograms of warhead. The drone could travel up to 1,000 kilometers at speeds exceeding 40 knots. It cost perhaps $200,000 to build. A single Russian frigate cost hundreds of millions. The mathematics of asymmetric warfare had never been so stark. The Magura V-5, developed by Ukrainian military intelligence, proved equally lethal. 5.5 meters long, capable of operating for 60 hours continuously. Armed with advanced targeting systems and video feeds that allowed operators to guide the drones to their targets in real time. Russian helicopters hunted these weapons across the Black Sea. Russian machine gunners tried to shoot them from ship decks. Electronic warfare systems attempted to jam their communications. Nothing worked consistently. The drones kept coming. By spring 2024, Ukraine had sunk or severely damaged more than a third of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. 22 vessels destroyed, 20 more damaged, many beyond repair. The landing ship Novokirkatsk destroyed in port at Feodosia by cruise missiles. The corvette Askold hit before it was even officially commissioned into the fleet. The patrol ship Sergei Kotov sunk by Magura drones near the Kerch Strait. The submarine Rostov-on-Don struck by Storm Shadow missiles while in dry dock for repairs. One by one, the vessels that were supposed to give Russia command of the Black Sea were being sent to the bottom or rendered inoperable. Britain's Ministry of Defense declared the Black Sea Fleet functionally inactive. The Russian Navy's annual parade, typically a display of maritime power, featured almost no Black Sea vessels. The remaining ships retreated from Sevastopol, the historic home of Russian naval power in the south, to Novorossiysk further east along the Russian coastline. Even there, they remained vulnerable. Ukrainian drones continued their extraordinary campaign, striking port facilities and vessels alike. And yet, the most haunting blow to Russian naval ambitions came not in the Black Sea, but in the Mediterranean. For over 50 years, Russia had maintained a naval facility at Tartus on the Syrian coast. The base dated to 1971, when the Soviet Union established a technical support point to service its Mediterranean squadron. It had survived the Soviet collapse, operating at minimal capacity through the chaotic 1,990 seconds. It had grown dramatically during Assad's brutal civil war, when Russian warplanes and warships helped the dictator claw back territory from rebel forces that had nearly toppled his regime. By 2017, Putin had secured a 49-year lease on the facility, free of charge, complete with permission to base nuclear-powered vessels and the right to store nuclear weapons aboard Russian ships in Syrian waters. Tartus was Russia's only naval base outside the former Soviet Union. It was the only warm water port that Russia could access without passing through straits controlled by NATO members or hostile powers. It linked the Black Sea Fleet to the wider Mediterranean. It supported Russian operations in Libya, Sudan, and across sub-Saharan Africa. It projected power against NATO's southern flank, positioning Russian warships just a few hundred miles from Italy and Greece. Think about that. A single port on the Syrian coast, connecting all of Russia's geopolitical ambitions in the Mediterranean world. A single port that made Russian power projection possible, far from the geographic constraints that had limited Moscow for centuries. And then, in December 2024, the Assad regime collapsed. The fall came with extraordinary speed that caught everyone, including the Russians, by surprise. Rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham advanced toward Damascus, while Russian forces, consumed by the war in Ukraine, provided minimal support. Moscow did not have the troops to spare. The military that had saved Assad in 2015 was bleeding in the Donbass. Assad fled to Moscow, seeking asylum from his former patron. Within days, satellite imagery showed Russian warships anchored offshore, having abandoned the piers at Tartus. The evacuation was chaotic. 2 frigates, an auxiliary vessel, a submarine. They withdrew from the port as rebels approached, uncertain whether they would face attack if they remained, their hollow defenses no match for the speed of Assad's collapse. On the 22nd of January 2025, the new Syrian government formally terminated the treaty that had allowed Russian military presence. After more than 50 years, Russia's Mediterranean foothold was gone. The Novorossiysk submarine, an improved Kilo-class boat capable of launching Caliber cruise missiles, slipped out through the Strait of Gibraltar on the 2nd of January 2025. The Portuguese Navy photographed its surface transit, the boat riding low in the water as it headed for the long journey back to the Baltic. There were no longer any Russian submarines in the Mediterranean. The last known conventional submarine deployment that Russia had maintained almost continuously for a decade was over. Naval News declared that Russia's Mediterranean presence was at its weakest since before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And yet, with the Bosphorus closed and Tartus lost, Russia faced a geometric impossibility. How do you maintain a naval presence in the Mediterranean when you cannot reach it from the Black Sea and you have no port to operate from? How do you project power into a region when you have no base to project from? The answer, apparently, is Libya. In the weeks following Assad's fall, American intelligence officials reported that Russian cargo planes were ferrying military equipment from Syria to eastern Libya. S-300 and S-400 air defense radars, military vehicles, communications equipment, personnel from the Afrika Korps, the Russian paramilitary force that had replaced the Wagner Group. Russia was attempting to establish a new foothold with Khalifa Haftar, the warlord who controls Libya's east and who has relied on Russian military support for years. But Libya is not Syria. Haftar is not Assad. The infrastructure does not exist. The political situation remains chaotic, with rival governments claiming legitimacy and foreign powers backing different factions. And even if Russia somehow secured formal port access in Tobruk or Benghazi, those facilities lie 400 miles from Greece and Italy, well within range of NATO surveillance and, if necessary, interdiction. Italy's defense minister warned that Russian repositioning toward Libya places hostile naval capabilities dangerously close to Italian maritime territory. The crumbling of Russian power projection has been remarkable to witness. It has been, to use a word that fits, haunting. Consider what Russia possessed just 3 years ago: a Black Sea fleet based at Sevastopol with cruisers, frigates, submarines, and landing ships. A Mediterranean task force operating from Tartus with modern frigates and diesel-electric submarines capable of launching cruise missiles. Freedom to transit the Turkish Straits during peacetime. Strategic depth extending from the Crimean Peninsula to the Syrian coast, from the Black Sea to the Eastern Mediterranean, from European waters to the approaches of Africa and the Middle East. Consider what Russia possesses now: a battered fleet hiding at Novorossiysk, unable to operate safely in waters controlled by Ukrainian drones. No submarines in the Mediterranean, no permanent port access south of the Black Sea. The Turkish Straits closed to warships transiting from the Mediterranean. Every vessel that leaves the Black Sea becomes a vessel that cannot come back. Every ship that needs maintenance must limp thousands of miles to the Baltic. The resilience that had sustained Russian naval power for centuries has given way to hollow pretense. And yet, the extraordinary irony is that Russia brought this upon itself. The Montreux Convention had protected Russian interests for nearly 90 years. It limited NATO naval presence in the Black Sea, restricting non-littoral states to vessels of 15,000 tons or less and visits of no more than 21 days. It guaranteed Russian passage rights in peacetime. It created a legal framework that served Moscow's strategic needs reasonably well, even if it also constrained Russian freedom of action. But the convention also contained provisions for wartime, and when Putin chose to invade Ukraine, he triggered exactly those provisions. Turkey's decision to close the straits followed directly from the language of a treaty that Russia itself had signed. Moscow could hardly complain about a treaty it had relied upon for nearly a century. Think about that for a moment. Putin's war has achieved the opposite of every stated objective. NATO has expanded to include Finland and Sweden, adding over 800 miles of new border with Russia and transforming the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. Ukraine has received hundreds of billions in Western military aid and has developed military capabilities it never possessed before. The Russian economy operates under crushing sanctions that have isolated it from Western technology and financial systems. The Black Sea Fleet has been devastated by a country with no navy. The Syrian base has been lost to rebels Moscow had spent years trying to destroy. And the Turkish Straits, the ancient choke point that has haunted Russian strategic planners for centuries, are closed. This is what hubris looks like in geopolitical terms. This is what happens when a leader believes his own propaganda about military invincibility. And yet, the implications extend far beyond Russia's immediate losses. Turkey has emerged as the decisive power in Black Sea security. Erdogan's government controls the straits, and that control has never been more strategically significant. Turkish naval forces provide approximately 65% of the maritime awareness in the Black Sea region, tracking movements and sharing intelligence with partners. Turkish drones have proven devastatingly effective in conflicts from Libya to Azerbaijan to Ukraine itself, transforming the balance of power in multiple theaters. Whatever settlement eventually emerges from the Ukraine war, Turkey will be central to enforcing it. Whatever security architecture develops in the Black Sea region, Turkey will be indispensable to its functioning. NATO's southern flank has been transformed by these developments. Romania hosts expanded alliance forces and has increased defense spending well above the 2% target. Bulgaria participates in mine-clearing operations and has begun to embrace a more active role in regional security. The Black Sea, once treated as a secondary theater, too complicated, too constrained by treaty obligations, too dominated by Russian power to be worth serious investment, now commands attention at the highest levels of alliance planning. And the haunting lesson for autocracies everywhere is this: military adventures carry extraordinary risks. Putin invaded Ukraine expecting a swift victory. He achieved strategic catastrophe instead. The resilience of Ukrainian resistance has been extraordinary. A nation with essentially no navy at the war's start has effectively neutralized Russian sea power through innovation, courage, and Western support. The Sea Baby drones cost a fraction of the vessels they destroy. The Magura unmanned boats operate despite every Russian countermeasure. The Neptune missiles struck the enemy flagship before the war was 2 months old. This is what asymmetric warfare looks like when executed brilliantly. This is what happens when a smaller power refuses to accept the logic of its supposed weakness. And yet, for all of Ukraine's remarkable achievements, geography still matters. Russia remains the largest country on Earth. Its nuclear arsenal ensures that no external power will attempt regime change in Moscow. The war in Ukraine grinds forward with terrible human cost on both sides. Hundreds of thousands dead and wounded, cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced. Nothing about this conflict has been quick or clean or merciful. But something fundamental has shifted in the balance of power. Catherine the Great spent her reign securing Russian access to warm water ports. Her successors fought war after war to maintain and expand that access. The Crimean War, the Russo-Turkish conflicts of the 1,870 the push into the Mediterranean during the Soviet era, all of it driven by the same geographic imperative that has shaped Russian foreign policy since the 18th century. And now, in the third decade of the 21st century, that access has effectively collapsed. The Black Sea Fleet has been rendered operationally irrelevant by a nation using drones that cost less than luxury automobiles. The Mediterranean presence has evaporated with the loss of Tartus and the closure of the Straits. Russia's centuries-long quest for maritime power projection in the south has reached a hollow dead end. There is something almost haunting about watching a great power's strategic ambitions crumble in real time. Putin launched his war believing that Russia could reshape the European security order through force. Instead, his military adventure has exposed every weakness in the Russian strategic position. The fleet that was supposed to blockade Ukraine now hides from Ukrainian drones. The base that was supposed to project power into the Mediterranean has been abandoned to Syrian rebels. The straits that Russia has coveted since the days of Catherine the Great are barred to its warships. And yet, the crumbling continues. Just this week, Ukrainian underwater drones struck 2 tankers from Russia's so-called shadow fleet in the Black Sea. The vessels, the Virat and the Kairos, were carrying Russian crude oil in defiance of Western sanctions. Both sustained critical damage from Sea Baby drone strikes in a joint operation by Ukrainian intelligence services and the Navy. Both were effectively taken out of service. Ukraine is now attacking not just Russia's naval vessels, but its economic lifelines, the very ships that allow Moscow to evade sanctions and fund its war. Think about the resilience required to wage this kind of campaign. Ukraine has no navy in the conventional sense. It cannot contest the Black Sea with surface ships or submarines or aircraft carriers, and yet, through sheer innovation and determination, it has achieved what no military analyst would have predicted 3 years ago. It has driven a superpower's fleet from waters that Russia considered its own. It has transformed the Black Sea from a Russian lake into a contested space where Ukrainian drones hunt at will. There are moments in history when the impossible becomes inevitable, when power shifts so dramatically that yesterday's certainties become today's relics. We are living through such a moment now. The Russian Navy was supposed to be a formidable force. It was supposed to project power from the Baltic to the Pacific, from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. Putin invested billions in modernization. He ordered new frigates, new submarines, new missile systems. He posed for photographs on the decks of warships and in the control rooms of nuclear submarines. He made naval power central to his vision of Russia restored to great power status, a vision he articulated in speeches about the collapse of the Soviet Union being the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. And yet, here we are. The Black Sea Fleet decimated by drone boats, the Mediterranean squadron dispersed, the Turkish straits closed, the Syrian base lost to rebels who advanced on Damascus while Russian forces bled in Ukraine. Every strategic assumption that guided Russian naval planning for decades has been shattered by the reality of a war that Putin chose to start. This is the crumbling of an empire's maritime ambition. This is what happens when centuries of strategic aspiration collide with the consequences of catastrophic miscalculation. And yet, the story does not end with Russia's losses. It continues with what comes next. Turkey will play an increasingly central role in Black Sea security. Erdogan has positioned himself as an indispensable mediator, hosting peace talks, brokering grain deals, maintaining communication with both Kyiv and Moscow, even as he provides weapons to Ukraine. Whatever criticisms might be leveled at Turkish foreign policy, the strategic reality is clear. Turkey controls the straits. Turkey has the region's most capable navy. Turkey will shape whatever order emerges from this conflict. NATO must develop a coherent Black Sea strategy that it has never possessed. The alliance has historically focused on the North Atlantic, the Baltic, and Central Europe. The Mediterranean received attention through the Sixth Fleet and southern member states, but the Black Sea remained something of an afterthought, too complicated, too constrained by the Montreux Convention, too dominated by Russian power to be worth strategic investment. That has changed. Romania and Bulgaria are now frontline states in a way they were not before. Ukraine's remarkable naval campaign has created opportunities that did not previously exist. The weakening of Russian naval power opens space for enhanced Allied presence and cooperation. And yet, the haunting reality remains. This war is not over. Hundreds of thousands have died. Cities have been destroyed. Millions have been displaced. The suffering continues with no clear end in sight. What we can say is that the strategic landscape has been transformed. Russia's maritime position in the south has collapsed in ways that will take decades to rebuild, if rebuilding is even possible. The dreams of Peter and Catherine, the ambitions of Soviet admirals, the plans of Putin's naval staff, all of it confronting the harsh reality of geographic constraint and military failure. The Bosphorus remains closed to Russian warships. The Black Sea Fleet remains battered and hiding. The Mediterranean remains empty of Russian submarines. Tartus remains in the hands of forces hostile to Moscow. And somewhere in Istanbul, the water of the strait continues to flow between two continents, as it has for millennia, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires, carrying the commerce of nations through a choke point that has once again determined the fate of Russian power. Think about that for a moment. A mile of water, 88 years of treaty law, and the crumbling of an empire's maritime dreams. This is the story of how Turkey blocked Russian warships and how Putin's Mediterranean access disappeared. It is a story of geography and hubris, of innovation and resilience, of ancient imperatives colliding with modern realities. The hollow echo of Russian naval power in the Mediterranean tells us something profound about the limits of military force and the enduring power of geographic constraint. Putin believed he could reshape the world through violence. Instead, he has been shaped by it. The straits remain closed today. The fleet remains trapped. The base remains lost. And the lesson, haunting and clear, is that even the mightiest powers cannot escape the consequences of their own choices. Thank you for being here. Stay well informed, and good night.